Hey folks, how's it going? Just a quick video today. I have been reading in preparation for my next class on Alfred North Whitehead. I've been reading some ancient philosophy, specifically some Platonic philosophy. And a few things jumped out at me right away. First one is how the concept of space-time seems to be embedded in Plato's idea of time and eternity. I have to explain that. And Plato's idea of, Plato's concept of the ideas, the changeless ideas, and the changing world, which is the ground in which the changeless ideas manifest themselves. This is foundations of Western philosophy. It's an archetypal perspective. It's idealism, essentially, in its most basic form. It says that the ideas are actually what's real, and it's important that we understand what he means by ideas. It's not quite what your typical basic undergrad philosophy class would call. It's like the horseness, there's this horseness idea and it manifests in all these different horses. It's true to some extent, but he's also talking about something a little bit more abstract than that in terms of ideas. There's not necessarily just an eternal horse, but it's like this idea of this it's more like laws, like mathematics and physics is how we would think about it. Like the law of gravitation, we would think of, Plato would probably call an idea, a formative idea that kind of shapes the way the world, acts. And we all kind of agree with that in broad terms. Gravity is the way that mass, acts on other masses. More mass attracts other mass, therefore, all the physical bodies in the universe tend to behave according to this basic law of gravity. So we would be okay with that. It gets weird when it gets to stuff like horse. You're like, well, what's the perfect horse? Who says? What does the perfect horse look like? And is the idea, and there's this realm somewhere where this idea of perfect horse lives. It's pretty weird and far-fetched from the modern perspective. But okay, to bring it back to what we were talking about, time, space-time. Time, according to Plato and other folks, time is, and this is my own definition, so bear with me. Time is a measurement of transformation. It measures change. You can measure change and transformation in things with various ways. It's been done in various ways throughout human history. We can measure it by, the rotation of the Earth, which we call a day, or we can, revolution of the Earth around the sun, which we call a year, a light year, how long light travels in a year. All these are measurements of transformation. Something is changing in space, and therefore time only exists in relationship to transformations in space. And so if you don't have any transformations in space, you don't have time. So let me pose this question to you. If at this moment the world pauses, nothing moves, nothing changes, and it stays that way for 100 years, in theory, whatever 100 years is without change, okay, just bear with me. But a duration of time stays that way for 100 years, and then in 100 years, boom, everything starts right from where it left off. You would have no way of knowing that 100 years had elapsed between the time it was paused and the time it restarted. And in essence, that time wouldn't be able to be accounted for. It wouldn't exist because nothing changed. We wouldn't know, there's no way to know that anything changed. And therefore there wouldn't be anything to measure, no transformations to measure, and therefore we wouldn't have time. Most of us are caught in a much more abstract sense of time. This is like Newtonian time. It's absolute time that moves separately from space. That is one of the big changes in relativity theory, is that time and space are linked. There's a recognition that time exists in relation to space. So that's one of the great changes that Einstein introduced into physics. And so if we bring this all the way back to Plato and we talk about the ideas, or let's say like the law of gravity, right? If that doesn't change, is there time associated with it? I know I'm being kind of silly and abstract here, but in order to understand Plato's philosophy, the realm of ideas is outside of time, because the ideas themselves don't change, because they're archetypes. They're these fundamental changeless underlying patterns, like mathematics or like the law of gravity, that are behind the things that we see manifesting in the world. They underlie it. They're what make it possible. They're the transcendental conditions of reality. So the world is a place of time, and the realm of ideas is a place of eternity. And the difference between eternity and time is change. And that change, transformation, is space. So you can see inside Plato's philosophy is this recognition of the existence of space-time as an entity, not absolute time and absolute space as two separate things that exist independently of one another, that you can look at separately and make sense of, but something that is deeply joined, and actually things that rely on each other for existence. Okay, so Plato's space-time. I just think it's interesting, because I've been looking at a lot of modern physics and trying to understand some relativity stuff, and it's kind of mind-bending because it doesn't really match our intuitions. My own intuition is shaped just like everyone else's by the culture that we're brought up in. I instinctually think of abstract time and space because that's the accepted view of our culture. We just have a feeling that space and time are these absolute things. It's like a big container in which everything happens. That's the Newtonian idea, but that's exactly what Einstein said doesn't hold when you get to much larger scales. It appears that way at this scale, but at larger scales it doesn't hold up. And at smaller scales it doesn't hold up. It actually only holds up in the appearance of our own experience. And so I found it very interesting to stumble across this all the way back in Plato, like 500 BC, of this kind of implicit acknowledgement of the existence of space-time as a single entity, because time implies transformation, and without transformation you have no time, and therefore Plato's ideas are eternal because they don't change. It's not like they exist in time and just don't change in time. They exist outside of time because time is a measurement of change. So anyways, that's just kind of what I'm chewing on this morning. Plato described the world as we experience it with the senses, the one that changes, as the moving face of eternity. It's like eternity is the thing that is reflected on the surface of water, and the surface of water is changing, and so the reflection changes. But the thing being reflected doesn't change, only the reflection on the water is changing, and that's what we see. We see the reflection on the water. We're seeing this changing kind of rendition of this eternal, idea or whatever that underlies reality. So it's fun to chew on. I haven't gotten really in depth in ancient philosophy. I'm familiar with it superficially, but it's fun to get a little bit more depth on it. So anyways, thanks for listening. I hope you found it interesting, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.